This section will teach you some of the basics so that you're productive in Designer. You can see a palette of items on the left, a canvas in the middle, and an application outline on the right. To place items on the canvas, you can either drag them to where you want, you can highlight an area on the canvas and place the item there. You can grab an item and move it to where you want. You can resize columns by grabbing the top of the page. You can drag items across columns by grabbing the handle in the lower right and simply dragging, or dragging back. You can also drag items down rows. You can add rows by either clicking on the side of the page, or you can simply just add an item where you want and it's going to add the row for you automatically. If I wanted to add it between these two items, it'll add a row there. You can also add a column by clicking the top of the page. You can adjust the width of the page by grabbing the side and dragging it across. At some point you'll want to preview your work, and you can do so by clicking on the preview icon in the upper right. It'll open a preview of your application in another tab to give you an indication of how your work is progressing. You can edit the titles of just about anything in your application directly, like this multi-line entry, or this page title. You can also set properties for any item in the application. So in this case, I'll make this full width. So when I drag it across columns, it takes the entire width of the page. You'll find that different items have different properties which you can set. So if we go over to zip code, which is a single line field, I can set the width, hover text, placeholder, hints. One that's very useful is the format, which is a way to validate information you're putting in. You've got some pretty clear instructions if you hover over the information icon. So I'll put in a format for zip code, or if you know anything about regular expressions, you can put those in as well. You can specify a custom error message if it's invalid, and now this will make sure that the zip code is formatted appropriately. Likewise with drop-downs, you can set properties here, and one of the things you do in properties for a drop-down, of course, is put in the different choices, which you can type in, or you can actually paste in. So if I go over to a spreadsheet, I can grab these two columns of state information, and then I can come over, click Import Choices, paste that information, and I'll import all that, and I'll get rid of the two placeholders. So now when I preview this, we'll put in a zip code. We'll see that that's invalid, and then we can pick a state. In most cases, you're going to build a form with one or maybe multiple pages. Like this registration form, I have a contact info page and then a select course page. And you can see I started to put a page navigation item onto the first page so you can get to the second. And of course, I'll want a page navigation item on the second page, so if you want to get back, you can do that. If you've started with everything on one page and decide that you want to go with a multi-page approach, a couple of things that you can try. One is duplicate the page, and then delete the items you don't want on each page. The other thing to keep in mind is that you can drag and drop items, including sections, across pages. Now let's say you have a situation where there's 3 pages, and what you want to do is go from page 3 back to page 1. So in this case, I have a summary of contact information, and I want to give the user a chance to edit the contact information, but to edit it, they need to get back to page 1. So here, of course it's a short form, and I could just click back a couple of times, but another option for page navigation is to use a button. So I'll change this title on the button to edit. And then I'm going to come over to events. And on the on-click event for the button, I'm going to put in a line of JavaScript. So if you learn one line of JavaScript, this should be it. So this is something you probably should learn and remember. So the way this works is you type in form dot select page left paren quote, then hit the shift and space bar at the same time, and you're going to see all the objects in the application so far. So what you want to do is pick the contact information page object, and you can see it popped in the ID of the object. More on IDs later in the JavaScript section of this tutorial. And then you close it with paren. So again, it's form.selectPage, capital P, left paren, quote, hit the shift space, select the page you want to go to, close the quote, close the paren, and then semicolon. And it's not going to let you save this unless the JavaScript syntax is valid. You can also click the check syntax. So that will work. So if we give this a test, I'll populate this contact information, go to the next page, pick a course, and then go into the third page. You can see the contact information. And again, of course, I could hit back twice, but if I click edit, I've got that JavaScript which will take me back to page 1. And then here I can edit the page. So that's another technique for doing page navigation. The final thing I want to show in this segment is page properties. When you have a multi-page form, what you want is the submit button to be on the last page. You don't necessarily want the submit button on the first and second page. So how do you do that? Well, you can go into the first and second page on page properties, and you can turn off the display of action buttons. So action buttons are what are referred to as the submit, cancel, approve, deny buttons. So we'll turn it off on that page, and then we'll turn it off on this page. And while you're in page properties, what you can do is set a range for the width of your page. Typically 320 to 700 or 800 works well, with a breakpoint of 550 where it will collapse to a single column. This will ensure that it displays properly on just about any mobile device. It's important to understand the data model behind the application that you're creating. So in this case, I have an application called Training Course Registration. It has two forms, a registration form and a course catalog form. So what this means is that it has two different data tables, a registration table and a course catalog table. And you can clearly see this when you look at the view results for this application. You've got a listing of the course catalog and one for registrations. This brings us back to the palette. If we look at the items in the palette, we have display items, which are for UI. Then we have fields, which define fields in the data table for each one of the forms. So whatever fields you put on your canvas, you declare those as fields in your data table. This segment is probably my favorite, and it shows the power of the product. So what I want to do is populate this course drop-down with the list of courses that are in the course catalog. Now the course catalog is a separate form, it's a separate data table. I can see the data table here. I can see the list of courses. So how do I get it into the drop-down? Well, the answer to that is to use services. So if we go into the drop-down properties and click on Edit and then say Use a Service, we'll add a service configuration, and the source of the service is going to be this application because the course catalog is in this application. So what we'll do is look for the course catalog below, and I can see there's a retrieve, a search. What we want is a search. Now the way I remember the difference between a search and a search will return many records, well, possibly many records, and a retrieve will return a single record. So we want to search all the records. I don't have any input criteria, so I'm going to skip 2. I'm going to go to 3. And for the found records, what I want to do is get the course title out of the catalog, and I want to go over to the registration form and the select a course drop down. I want to map that title to the saved value and displayed value. The reason you have 2 is in some cases they may be different. You may be saving a different value than what you're displaying to the user. So that's the first step in configuring a service to that drop down. Now the other thing I want to do is once you pick a course, I want to get this other information. I want to retrieve the date it's offered, the instructor, the cost, and the description. That's all in the catalog. So we're going to go back to the select a course drop down, and this time we're going to go over to events, and we're going to click on the on item change event, and we're going to call a service, and we'll add another service configuration. It's from the current application, but this time we want a single record. We want a record that matches the course that we choose. So we're going to map the select a course to the course title in the catalog, and then we're going to retrieve from the catalog the description, the cost, the instructor, and the date offered. So that's all I need to do to have my training course registration application talk to my course catalog. Let's preview this and take a look. I'll go over to the second page to select a course, and you can see that the search is pre-populating the select a course dropdown, and the on change event for the select a course is retrieving the other values. In this segment we're going to focus on sections. I use them all the time. Let's drag one, put it on the page. We'll drag it across 2 different columns, and you can see the section has columns in it. Sections can have any number of columns in them independent from the main form. You can have sections and sections and sections and sections, etc. So you can stack these and you can put them together to suit the formatting needs that you have for your application. So in this case, let's just leave this as 2 columns, and then we'll put these items into the section, and you can see this is a form which essentially is the same form as before, but now I have the information laid out on one page as opposed to 2 different pages. So I've got all the information now in the section. We'll clean up the empty rows that the moving of the items into the section left. If I go to section properties, I can put in a title. We'll call this contact info. I can display the title in the title bar. I can also make the section collapsible. So let's go ahead and preview this. And we can see that everything is in the section and it's collapsible. Not only are sections independent formats, so in this case we use the contact info section for its collapsibility and the fact that we could set whatever formats we want inside the section. That's great. It's a single entity, and that has many benefits, such as being able to copy the whole block. So let's copy contact info. We'll drag that across, and we'll change the title. Let's call this shipping address. And then we'll put a question before it. Is the shipping address the same as contact info? And we'll make the options yes or no, and display that horizontally since it's a short list. And then that allows me to apply a rule to the shipping address section. So you can see I'm dealing with this as a single entity. So let's show that section if this question, which I just added, equals no. So now when we preview this, we see the question, and if I click no, I see the shipping address section. Another interesting aspect of sections is the ability to collapse items vertically in them. So we have a question here, what is your favorite fruit? I put a section next to it. I want one column in the section and 2 rows. I'm going to turn off the background and the borders. A hint, if you do not have a border, it does not take a margin. So in the 2 different cells that I have here, I'm going to put an image. And in the first one, I'm going to add a file. We'll add a picture of a banana. And we'll make sure that that is no bigger than 75 pixels. So now I'll put another image in. This time I'll grab a picture of an apple. And we'll make that also 75 pixels in height. Then what I could do is say, let's add a rule. And the rule says, show this image, which is the banana, when the answer is banana. Apply and close. And we'll come over here and we'll add a rule to this image. And we'll say show this image, which is the apple, when the favorite fruit equals an apple. So if I preview this, you can see the question, what is your favorite fruit? If I click apple, it shows the apple. If I show banana, it shows the banana. And the point here being that because these 2 are in a section, it's collapsing the space vertically, creating a dynamic effect. The last thing I'll show with sections is how you can use them to create a carousel effect. Here I have the form laid out with the contact information and the course information in 2 different sections. Let's add a 3rd section, and then we'll put the 2 sections inside it. For the outer section, we'll set the properties for carousel, and we'll give it a very high number for a breakpoint. So, in other words, it's always going to be forced into carousel mode. In this case, we'll use 2000. When I preview this, you can see I get a carousel effect where I'm able to walk users through one section of questions at a time, similar to having the questions on different pages with page navigation. Text items are very useful and can be used for multiple purposes. Now, of course, I can take the text item, drag it over onto my page, and put a word like summary up here. And I can highlight that, make that bold. I can change the size of the font. I can apply different styles to it if I want to. That's pretty straightforward. But what text items can also do is summarize information that you've collected in the form. So let's say I want a summary of the contact information, and we'll bold that. And then right below it, what I'm going to do is insert items from the contact information page. So I'll put first name, some space, I'll go grab last name, and then I'll put in the address, city, comma, state, and then finally zip code. So if we take a look at this in action, I'll fill out the form, select a course, and then when I go to the summary page, you can see the text widget is echoing back the information that was entered. You can also put images in text items. So for instance, maybe I wanted to put the Domino Volt icon above the word summary. We'll simply click the picture, and we'll add the image, in this case from a URL. And you can specify the width that you want. Or you can specify a percentage. And what this will do is allow you to make the image responsive. So if you want the image to always be a 5% width of the page, you can do that. Text items can also be used for creating links. So perhaps I want to link to our privacy policy. So I highlight the text and then insert the URL. Now these could also be documents. Perhaps there's a PDF that you need to review before going to the course. I find another use for text items to be for navigation. So let's say next to the contact information summary, I want to click on the word edit and have that take me to the contact info page to make changes. Well, let's go into the text properties and we'll go to the events, and on the on-click event we're going to put in a line of JavaScript, form, select page, capital P, left paren, quote, and then we're going to hit the shift space bar, select the contact information page, close the quote, right paren, semicolon. So we saw this with a button. Now we're adding the same line of JavaScript to a text item. And as a little extra, I've added an HTML fragment here. So this is the HTML item on the canvas, which you can simply just pull over and then type whatever markup you want in. In this particular case, this is an inline style, and it's nothing more than cursor being the pointer, and it has a name called cursor that I've given it. So we'll enter cursor on the Advanced tab under CSS Custom Classes and then preview this. I see the word edit, and when I hover over it, my cursor changes to a pointer, and then when I click on that, it goes to the contact information page. Tables are used when you have one-to-many relationships. So in this case, I've changed the course registration form to accommodate team registration. You can either register as an individual or you can register a team of people. And I have a rule on this question that will point to one of two sections based on whether you're registering an individual or a team. But I haven't built out the section for team yet. So let's add a table to that section. We'll drag the table across the columns, and then we'll go edit the table. A table is nothing more than a subform. All rules that apply to creating a form apply to creating a table. So what I can do is add my field for first name. I can make this wider. I can set properties. Well, you know how to do this, so I went ahead and built out the table. So here's the finished table. If I go to the main form, I can see the table listed. It's quite wide. It also doesn't have a title. Let's give it a title. Let's go into properties. And maybe I don't want to show all of these columns. So we'll get rid of a number of these. And I can change the width of columns. And if I preview this, I have it set so by default it shows individual. If I click on team, it's going to bring up the table. I can then populate a record in the table and continue with the rest of the team. Tables are also very good at displaying information. This could be purely informational, or it could be to facilitate a selection. In this scenario, we have courses that are offered multiple times during the year, so it makes sense for me to display a table where I have the course title and the date that it's offered, so that you can go and you can sort by course or date and pick the course and the appropriate date that you want. So the way we'll do this is we'll load the table with the course information, and it's coming from the course catalog, and we use a service to do that. So if I go into the table properties, I'm going to go over to events, and I'm going to use the on-show event. So whenever this table is shown, I'm going to call this service. We'll go ahead and specify the service configuration. It's going to be a search, so this is just like the drop-down that we pre-populated. I have no input criteria. I want to get from the course catalog in this search the course title, and you can see the table here on the right. We'll map that to the course title in the table, the date that is offered. We're going to get the instructor. So I have items in the table that I'm not showing, but they're there, and we're going to pass the information to them. And then I'm going to get the cost and the description. So if we preview this, we'll go over to the second page of the form. The on-show event loaded the table with the information, and then I have just a little bit of JavaScript, which is selecting the first row when it's also shown, and then any row I click on, and I can see more detail. I can sort by clicking on the column head, by title, or by date offered. So for instance, if I wanted to go to the Advanced Domino Vault to learn more about using JavaScript with Domino Vault, I might choose the soonest date I could find. So this would be a way to facilitate a selection, which is a little bit different than using the drop-down, which we showed earlier. The Manage page is the one place where you can see all your apps, or apps that others have elected to give you admin access to. Perhaps you're collaborating on the app together. Here you can see my list. All my apps are running. I've got an icon here which is telling me that this application, Training Course Registration, has changes that are saved but not yet deployed. And this brings up an important point. You can make changes to an application, save those changes, preview those changes, and do so without disturbing the runtime. This gives you the ability to deploy, or redeploy more accurately, the new version of the app when you're ready. When you first create an app, we'll create one very quickly. We'll throw a couple of fields in there, save that, and then go to the Manage tab. You can see that View Responses in Launch is grayed out. It also says that it's undeployed. So at this point what I have is a design which is saved. I do not have a running application. So if I click down below, I don't see any URL or information about how to launch this. But if I deploy the application, It takes the design and generates the runtime. It's now live, and if I go back here, you can see that it has a unique ID and a URL. I can then make changes to the app, save that, go back to the Manage page, and it's going to tell me that I have changes which are saved which are different than the production or runtime app. So let's say I want to give a colleague of mine admin access to an application. So Jared needs to work on this. I've been working on it for a while. So I'll go over to the Access tab in Designer for this application, and then under Administrator role, I'll put in Jared's ID. And then when I save this, and when Jared logs into Volt, Jared will see this application and be able to edit and update this app. The last topic I'd like to cover in this section is the notion of exporting, importing, and upgrading applications. So for example, if I go to the training course registration app and click on Export, what it will do is produce a file, and this file can optionally include data which I've collected via this app. And that file contains everything that defines the application, all the artifacts, all the logic, and optionally the data. That file can be used to then import back into Volt by you or by another user, essentially becoming a template, or it can be used for moving an application from one environment to another, or for version management of the application. So you've built your form and now you want to add workflow. Well, this is the right tutorial to look at. Workflow is pretty easy to add to your application. This app that we've created is a request app. The way we want it to work is an employee fills it out, and then it goes to that person's manager where they either approve or deny it. Now, workflow is made up of what we refer to as stages and access. And if you look up at the top here, you can see that there's a tab for stages and then one for access. So we're going to start on stages. So now that I'm in stages, you can see the canvas, the outline of the form, but on the left I have the different workflow stages. These are the default workflow stages. So start is where the form is first filled out. The submit button, or what we call an action button, points to the submitted stage. So that's where it goes when it's submitted. And then in submitted, we have another action button called update, and it points back to itself. So the default workflow is very good at collecting information and then being able to update that information. Now, end is a stage which you can use, which is like an archive. It's the end of the road. There's no updates that are allowed in end. So let's go to submitted, and what we want to do is add a couple of stages after this. So we're going to add a stage called approved, and then we're going to add a stage called denied. So the way this would work is that an employee would submit it in start. It would go to the submitted stage, and we're going to take this action here and we're going to change this to approve, and we'll have this button point to the approved stage. And if you look down at the bottom, this is where you can add and delete actions and set their properties. So I'm going to delete the cancel button. I'm not a fan of cancel buttons. And then we're going to add another submit button, and we're going to call this one deny. And the deny button is going to point to the denied stage. So that's pretty simple. So start points to submitted stage, then can either go to approve or denied. And we can get more complex than that, but we'll keep it simple for the sake of this tutorial. Now, when the employee submits this form, what we want to do is trigger an activity. So if I look at the properties for this submit event, you can see that there are a number of different activities. The first is to send an email, then call a service, and then assign users by service call. We'll look at the third option here in a bit, but the first one assumes that you know who you want to send it to, or perhaps the role that you want to send it to. So what you can do is simply just say send it to perhaps the initiator. If it's an authenticated scenario, then you know who the initiator is. The trick here is, if you want to send it to a manager, is the manager assigned to a role, or do you know the manager's email? So in this case, we know the manager's email because it's in the form, so what we can do is pick that value out of the form. We can put it here. And then we can carbon copy the employee, because we also have that item, that value in the form. And then we can come down here and put in the subject. And then in the body of the notification, you could type in something like your employee, and then you could use the insert item to put the name of the employee as requested, and again insert a variable from the, or value from the form, and then finally you could put a link to the form so that they can get to the form in the submitted stage. So you can see the email activity is there. You can also specify what is the completion message, whether that be in a dialog or in a page, which is a form setting which you can set. If you don't want it, you can simply just delete this content and it does not show. And then one other useful thing to know about the action properties is you can specify a redirect URL. Perhaps you want them to go to a certain web page after they submit the form. In this example, we have a role called managers, which is open, and when the user submits the form, it goes to a stage called received. The manager role then has the ability to read and update the form. This works with the activities. So in this case, we have 3 different activities. The first one is an email notification going to the initiator. The second one is assign user by service call. And the way we're doing this is we're making a service call to another application that manages the different individuals that are assigned to different request types. So there's different types of requests that you can make, and then based on that type, there could be different people or a particular person that's responsible for working that request. So we pass the type of request, and then what we do is we get back out the email address from the service. And the service in this case is another Volt application, and we pass that to the manager's role. So if we look at the email that falls right after that, once we assign the user to that role, we can then send it to a role, in this case managers. Now if you needed to look up the employee's manager, you could do the same thing, provided you had the service that could return that information. The last thing I'll cover is stage visibility rules. So you might have noticed in this application I have an item called Manager's Comments. So if we go over to Stages, when it's in the start stage, I don't want the employee to see that. So what I can do is click the I, now it's hidden. So I can hide any item in any stage. I can hide any page in any stage, any section. You can also determine what is read-only versus read-write. So perhaps in the submitted stage, I want the manager to be able to add comments but not change the description or any of the items that the employee filled out. So I can lock those down. So if I take a look at this application in action, I can fill it out in the start stage, submit it, and then when I go and view results, I see it's in the submitted stage. In the submitted stage, I see the manager's comments item is displaying based on the page visibility rule. So I can approve this and then come back and see that the record is approved in View Results.